Over the last couple of years, mechanical keyboards have experienced a bit of a renaissance in modern computing. There's a whole new variety of switches out there that are competing with legacy switches. We have new Chinese OEMs competing with some of the more legacy switch providers, and there's whole communities around building really awesome custom keyboards. The problem, though, is if you want to use one of these in an office, they make a lot of noise. Cherry, the company that's responsible for making some of the oldest switches and some of the most reliable, think they have a solution with a new switch they call the MX Silent. This switch has a built-in sound dampener right into the sliding mechanism of the switch that's supposed to really dampen the noise. This is based off of their legacy black and red switches, some of their oldest switches. They're linear actuating, and supposedly it's supposed to make the switches a lot more livable in an office environment. We got the MX board Silent from Cherry equipped with the MX Silent switches, and here are some of our impressions. Overall, the switches pretty much act like a standard MX black switch. Like I said, they're linear actuating, very smooth, very predictable. In my experience, the actuation force required on the black switches is actually a little high and might not be suitable for novice users. If you're new to mechanical keyboards, I would highly recommend checking out the MX Red Silent switches, which have a much lower force and I think are a little bit easier for new beginners. So it's unsurprising that with the sound dampener built in, the MX Silent switches are considerably more quiet than standard MX Cherry switches. But being comparatively silent compared to other mechanical keyboards may mean it still makes quite a bit of noise in an office environment. So how does the MX Silent switch stack up? We compared it with a Rosewell keyboard equipped with MX Cherry Brown switches. These aren't particularly clicky switches, but they do have a little bit of tactile feedback, as well as an Apple Magic keyboard, which we think is pretty standard in an office environment. In comparison, the MX Silent switches are much quieter than the MX Browns. They're less piercing and just have a much more consistent noise floor compared to some of the louder switches. Compared to the Apple Magic keyboard, the difference is a little bit more muddy. They're actually, when you look at the average sound files that we put together for these, about a decibel apart, which I don't think is really noticeable for most consumers. However, when you listen to the Apple Magic keyboard, I do find that it peaks much more than the MX Silent switches. So I would say in an office environment, I actually find that to be less obtrusive than the Apple Magic keyboard, which again, with their little scissor switches, can create kind of a little bit of a piercing noise. So in our testing, we really like the MX Silent switch, but what about the MX board Silent as a keyboard? There, the question becomes much more muddled. This is the MX Silent board, and looking at it, it's a pretty big beast. Compared to my other full-size Rosewell keyboard, there's about 2 inches of extra plastic on top of here that seemingly serve no purpose. This extra girth would be acceptable if it had exceptional build quality, but it actually is quite a bit lighter than the Rosewell keyboard we were comparing it to. On top of the extra girth, the keyboard does have some other build quality issues. Like I said, it's an all-plastic case, and there's quite a bit of flex, especially when you get into that extra 2 inches at the very top of it, when you can just press down with your thumb and that board's flexing all day long. Other issues include a non-detachable USB cord, which doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but considering a broken USB cord could require you to buy a whole new mechanical keyboard, that's a big investment for just one bad cord, and we appreciate seeing that in other keyboards. Finally, the real deal breaker for me was the actual material of the keycaps themselves. While the switches are nice and responsive and relatively quiet, the keycaps are made of the exact same material as the rest of the keyboard body, and it's slippery but also not smooth, so it just makes for a really gross typing experience. So overall, really like the MX Silent switch, but the MX board Silent doesn't really do the switch justice in practice. For a full review of the MX board Silent, be sure to check out gestaltit.com. We have all sorts of audio samples comparing it from various distances, so you can get a sense for yourself just how silent this board is. And remember, please subscribe, like this video, and subscribe to the channel and do all that YouTube-y stuff. We would really appreciate it. I'm pointing down here for the subscribe button, but I don't know if it's there or not. So there you go.